I think that happened one time when you and I were
Mhm.
having a Zoom meeting talking about other stuff. So, okay, let's see. This should be coming up. It's redirecting it to
I think
YouTube.
that
That happened one time when you and I were
Do I have to
having
click
a,
OK here?
pardon?
No, okay, no, okay, no, that's all right. No, go ahead. Never mind. Figured it out myself.
Okay, so we are going to admit and okay. So hello everybody. I'm Dan Jones with Jones Business Management and Growth Consultant, and I welcome you to this week's live webinar where we are going to talk about leadership. It's not just a title. And my guest is Mark Danderson, and he's a friend of mine who has some extensive leadership experience and some teaching experience. And Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Good
Now,
to be
why
here,
don't you
Danny.
tell us a little bit about your experience, please?
Okay, sure. I worked in medical education. I worked for New England Journal of Medicine. I ran their international division for 25 years. I also worked with the Chinese Ministry of Health for a decade. And for the past decade, I have been a professor at Salisbury University here in Salisbury, Maryland. And my role here has been to run the internship department for one of the schools.
Okay. And you've instructed on leadership. Uh,
Yes, yeah, I have.
yeah,
I conducted a course on. I did conducted a course to help students uh, when they leave university to look for a job and to prepare for interviews. And part of that program is talking about leadership. What type
okay.
of identifying the type of leader your respective report to is, and then deciding what type of leadership works for you, so that you take, as the student, you take the right job, but as an employer, you hire the right employee.
Right. Right. So, for our viewers who may not understand, can you explain uh, for them what does leadership mean to you, and maybe that would help them get a broader understanding of what it could mean for
Sure.
them.
Okay, there are many theories to leadership. Many. There are 10 that we can talk about, but once you get into the day-to-day work, it gets hard to determine. Oh, do I need to do this, or should I be this type of leader or that type of leader? So I like to distill it down, and for me, leadership is about example. And my favorite leadership theorist is actually Queen Elizabeth.
You know?
And the reason she's my favorite leadership theorist is because she had a motto that she used in her 75-year reign that I think actually goes a long way to demonstrating good leadership. And her motto was duty first, self second. So the first thing you need to do as a leader is to separate your own self interest from the interest of the task at hand. And as a good leader, the first thing you should ask yourself if the situation arises is, what is my duty here? Not what I feel, not how I feel about something, but
Right.
what is my duty here? What do I need to accomplish? And put aside your feelings and your preferences, and like, hey, I have a task. What's my duty? Just doing that goes a long way to creating visionary leadership.
So you said that this was Queen Elizabeth's motto, and you said
Yeah.
she's your favorite theorist.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, I guess we can talk a little bit about uh, that. That this was her motto. Your values have to your core values, who you are as an
Yeah.
individual, really needs to shape like who you're going to be as a leader, and
Right.
it shapes your business, right?
Does. It
A lot
does.
of us, we talk about this when I'm talking about, branding your business, marketing your business, running your business, that, your values translate to what the values of the company are, but your values also, they feed your motto as a leader,
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
exactly. And that's one of the things I always taught my students when they go into an interview. They need they I should always remember that it's a two-way street. They're interviewing the company as well, and particularly they should focus on the person they are going to report to. And before they walk into that meeting, they should decide what type of leader they believe they would work best under,
Right.
and then ask questions to determine what type of leader they're talking to. And that doesn't mean like there are good, better, and best leadership styles. There are 10 different styles. And um, and in fact, people tend to, because of their personality, lean toward one style. Like I'm a servant leader,
Right.
which means that when I approach my employees, I like employees who would do their job. Now they would have a job description, they know what they would have to do, and I would prefer that they do their job, but I'm not laissez-faire. A laissez-faire leader is one that says, okay, here's your job, go do it. Don't talk to me. I don't want to hear. Um, a servant leader is slightly different. A servant leader will say to an employee, here's your job, here are your tasks. You do it the way you see fit,
Yeah.
but unlike the laissez-faire leader, you periodically meet with the person or talk to the person and say, is there anything you need? Are you having any problems?
Right.
Can you report to me, tell me what's going on, tell me what I can do to make your job easier or help you do a better job.
Right.
And so that's that leadership style. And that's why Queen Elizabeth is one of my favorites, because that fits her motto: duty
Right.
first, self
Yeah.
second.
So a little bit about what you're talking here kind of runs a little bit between what leadership is and management might be, in the respect that you're asking them, how can I help you to do your job? That's a leadership function,
Right.
but this is your job, and I'm going to manage, like,
Right.
for example, with me. I would tell certain people that were in my landscaping business, like my right hand, my operations manager, this is the box within which you work. I don't care how you get the job done, provided you don't violate my core principles, which are the company's core principles,
Right.
and one of which is, respect, and you don't break any laws, I'm fine with however you get the work done,
Right.
right? And
Right.
and you may come up with a better process than me. So a little bit of that, wouldn't you say, is kind of management, like, because then you got to
Oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. Well, this is how I
check
look at
in.
that.
Yeah, okay.
Management is drawing the box. Management is, here's the box, here's the things in the box.
Yeah,
That's management. Leadership is then saying to an employee, this is your box. Now, how are you going to do the things in that box? If you're an autocratic manager or leader, you say, here's the box, here's the things you're going to do, and you will do it this way, this way, this way, this way, in that order, in that order, in that order.
right.
Um, and so that's one style of management and or leadership. It doesn't, I'm not evaluating any of the leadership styles here.
No,
You need to think of which style works best for you
right.
in a circumstance
Yeah.
with a specific employee.
So, well, we can get into a little bit of those styles and more like how younger or newer businesses, that maybe don't have
Right.
employees, can start to exert that in a little bit. But let, how about we talk a little bit first, because I think this is a building block, the difference between authority and influence.
Right.
Because a good leader um, has both.
Right.
One may come from the title, but the other one comes from the way that they present themselves, I guess.
Right.
So,
Well, leadership. So now you're getting into another aspect of leadership, which is inspiration. And there are many times in over the course of my career where I would take leadership of a situation where I had no authority. And people do that all the time.
Hmm.
People lower down on the totem pole can be leaders. They can take charge and get something done, which goes back to my favorite theorist: duty first, self
Right.
second. And what we're talking about here is just like focusing on the duty. What's my duty here to get the job done? The company has values, the company has a mission, the company has an objective. What is my duty to complete that mission? And
Right.
that doesn't necessarily have to be, what are my responsibilities? Those are two different things. What are my tasks?
Right.
Duty and what are my tasks are two different things. They coalesce, like you do your duty to do your tasks.
Right.
But if you are part of an organization, um, you have a duty to the entire organization that goes beyond what your individual job is. Your individual job is only part of a cog in a great big wheel to accomplish a whole. So, and every employee is faced with this. There are times where you are faced with, um, I won't say the responsibility, because that's not, you have responsible for this task, but you were faced with a situation where, in order to get the job done for the company, you would be required to do things that are not in your job description.
Right. Yeah.
That's
So,
leadership. And if you do it, that's leadership.
so yes, and I agree. And I'd like to give an example of that
Go
in
ahead.
a second. But the first thing that I'd like to ask you before I get to that example is, it, do you feel that business owners have a right to expect that their team members um, will place duty first, at least while they're at work? I'm not saying at 2 o'clock in the morning waking up and and doing whatever, but is it a legitimate expectation for a business owner to expect that their team make duty first?
uh, I'm not going to give you a yes or no answer. I'm going to give you a yes but answer.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you do have the right to expect that, but you also have to understand that people are fallible,
Hmm.
and people don't always do their duty. They do their self-interest.
Yes.
And when that happens, you don't look at that as a failure or berate someone. You pick up the pieces and you move on. And that's part of what leadership is this, just when failure comes, because failure comes,
Right.
and people are going to fail you. Even the best employee will fail you.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but that's not an occasion to berate someone. It's an occasion to evaluate, figure out how you do it different, move on.
Okay.
And that's leadership. Again, that's
Yeah.
leadership. But and that's
Yeah.
my and that's fits my preferred style: servant leadership.
Right. So my experience with leadership, started with my dad, of course, who was had his own business, and then eventually went to go work for Quaker State Motor Oil and worked himself up pretty high there until he was given early retirement when the oil industry was suffering back in the 80s. Um, and so his position at that point, I was graduated from high school, but he still had two kids living at home. They'd moved to Florida and he needed a job. And so he was working like a job during the day and then a job at night. And his night job was at McDonald's just to cover the bills. And it was, my kid brother had ended up working at the same place with him. And uh, the manager walked up to my dad and he's like, "Yeah, the bathroom needs to be cleaned." Now my dad's 56, 57 at that point, and
Mhm.
dad just grabbed the mop and went in the bathroom and cleaned it. And on the way home at the end of the shift, my kid brother says to dad, he goes, why'd you even do that? I mean, that manager is like 30 years old and he told you, go do that. And my dad said, and I heard this story from my brother, right? So it made an impact. he said, I made an agreement with this business that, from this point to that point, I would do the things that were necessary.
Mm.
And the thing that was necessary was to have a clean bathroom for the people. So I did it. He
Yeah,
didn't argue, right?
right,
Now, I mean,
right,
part of that was my dad had a duty to his kids, and he didn't want to lose his job because he needed to cover the
right,
bills and a duty
right.
to my mom. But the other part was, he had agreed this was the job, and it included cleaning the bathroom if need be, right? And to me, um, how you respond to things says a lot about your character. And,
Yeah,
we are fallible. We're all going to mess it up sometimes.
right.
But I think that came from my dad having been a leader and then recognizing that, that this was the task that was at hand right now, and he just had to do it, as unpleasant as I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
You
No
know,
one likes cleaning the bathroom.
no, nobody likes cleaning other people's bathrooms, that's for sure. So, yeah. Um, is there a myth that you think that people believe about leadership, maybe that we could dispel?
I uh, I think, again, this is my own feeling,
Sure.
but I think the myth that leaders are born, not made, is a myth. I do
Agreed.
not think leaders are born. I think I think it can be situational. You could exhibit leadership. Someone who's never exhibited leadership, you put them in the right situation and the right circumstance at the right moment, and they exhibit leadership. They take charge. They complete a task. Um, so I think leadership can be episodic.
Yeah. I,
Um, but
I
you,
think some people are exposed to it more,
yeah, yeah.
um,
But
and that's helpful.
mhm,
But I think that anybody can. Um, I I had somebody that was working for me that became very valuable to me, and I moved him up. And I told him, I said, look, because he was a vet too, and I said, look, I said, I'm going to tell you the way that I've done this and see if it works for you.
mm,
I said, before I even hired my first team member, I thought to myself, who was the best sergeant I ever had when I was in the Army? Who was the worst sergeant?
mhm,
And I picked the three best things about that person that was good.
mm,
The three ways that I felt that they were a good leader. And then I picked the three most terrible things from the other person. And I said, okay, these three things I'm going to try and emulate, the good things. And these three bad things I am going to remove from my style one by one, almost like Ben Franklin's, where he would work on improving a different aspect of his
right.
personality. Um, and and he did that. And he grew as a leader because I think that you can learn a lot uh, from watching other people that are good. I mean, if
Yeah.
if you respect them, then that means something about their leadership style resonated with you. And
Right.
if it
Yeah.
resonates with you, that's almost like, minerals that are the same will make the same, they do the same vibration because they're equal,
Right.
right? And so if that resonates with you, that means that's a part of your personality that person also shares.
Yeah.
So it's
Exactly.
probably, a good lesson for you to take. And this is what I would encourage to, everybody that's listening. Um, it, I'm sure you've all had good and bad leaders. And maybe you didn't work in the corporate world, maybe you weren't in the military, but you were in school, right? Who was your best teacher? Who was your worst teacher? Who were the best students that everybody
Mm,
kind of, not the smartest students, but the ones that everybody gathered around, right? And who were the ones that everybody kind of wanted to stay away from. There's examples in our life all the time that we
yeah.
can look at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know,
But you reminded me of something. Like, you know, I agree. Anyone can be a leader.
mhm,
However, there's a caveat to that. Not everyone wants to be a leader.
That's true. I
and
learned
and
that the
that's
hard way.
and that's why there's one of the styles of leadership is bureaucratic. And that would be the style you would use for someone who had no desire in leading. They just wanted to be told what to do and how to do it and when to do it. Here, you tell me what to do, and I'll do what I need to do. And they're doing their duty. Remember Queen Elizabeth
Right. Yep.
they're doing their duty, but they have no interest in taking an initiative. They have no interest in becoming a leader. They just want to be. I had an employee like that. It was a really good employee,
Right.
and and that's not my style. And I found it very frustrating working with this guy. I would try to, my company was really big on helping the employees grow and expand and take on responsibilities. And I could not get this guy. Every time we had an issue, he would walk in and say, "Here's an issue," and I would say, "Okay," because this was my style. "Okay, there's an issue. How would you solve it?"
Right.
And his answer was always the same. "How do you want to solve it?"
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And some of that is the bureaucratic, and
Yeah,
sometimes it's some people are afraid of making any mistake,
yeah, yeah,
so they won't make any choice.
right.
Um, and other people just, they don't want, like you said, they don't want the
Yeah,
responsibility.
I want
And
the
I think
responsibility.
that's an important question as you grow your organization. You can look at somebody in your organization and say, oh my God, this guy's a rock star. He'd be great. And I'm going to make him like, the head of my landscape and sod installation. Um, Ask them first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Some people are really content where they are.
They are, and I had a company that I was talking with, and the owner was getting ill, and he knew that he wasn't going to be able to stay with it very much longer, and his goal was to pass off the company in part to one of the employees who'd been with him for years. But instead of like asking like how you feel about this or seeing where the guy was, he just came to him with the deal. And it wasn't anything that the guy wanted, and it
Yeah,
scared him, and he just ghosted the job
yeah,
because he felt this enormous sense of
yeah,
pressure.
yeah,
And, as leaders, we have to be mindful
yeah,
that, what we think is going to be the right fit may not be what the other person envisions for their life or career or whatever.
right.
We've got to be open to conversations. We have to listen. I say listen as I've been talking for the last minute and a half.
I was listening. I was doing the listening. See, I was being a good follower. I
Good
was
follower.
listening.
There you go. Yeah. Actually, I think
Um,
I think for me, an effective part of leadership, and again, it's my style, um, is to listen and think,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
For me, I'm collaborative with servant leadership also.
yeah,
I I want other people who know their little corner of the business to give me ideas, and the areas where we overlap, bring all those people in so that we can kind of figure out the answers. Um, but then you have to understand it's you that in the end is making the decision, right?
right,
So even if you get people to give you, an idea, and let's say, I've got six people, we're all brainstorming together, and let's say four out of the six say this is the way we think we ought to go. Ultimately, it's my decision,
right,
and I've got to take the responsibility, like Harry Truman, had on his desk, the buck stops here. It's ultimately my responsibility. And it's not fair to the people who open up to you and tell you what they think would work
right.
to then turn around and go, well, I used your crummy idea and look where it left us. Um, you
Well,
know,
that's also an aspect of leadership. You're the leader. You own all the mistakes.
yep,
You own them all.
yep, yeah, yeah. And yep,
Even
it's
if you
true.
even if you disagree with what your employee did and you hit your head, say your forehead, it's still you own the mistake. You
It's
own the
yes.
mistake.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
but see, that's part of leadership too, is risk taking,
yes,
and but not gambling. there's a difference between risk taking and gambling.
Yes.
Gambling is you take a risk without giving it any forethought or just like, okay, we're, we're playing the roulette wheel. Let's just say, put money down on red. And like
Right.
that's gamble. That's not risk taking. Risk taking is being informed of the pluses and minuses in any situation, where it can go well, where it can go wrong, and determining what you're going to do, knowing there's a risk it's going to fail.
Right.
Uh,
So
but it's doing
that's
your homework. You have
yeah,
to do your homework.
it's where data comes in,
Right.
right?
That's where data comes in.
This we talked about this for those who were in the webinar a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about pricing your your lawn maintenance jobs, to make the most profit. And, I said, if you're not tracking your production hours, you need to start tracking them. If you,
Yeah.
make a guess now, an educated guess,
Yeah.
and then start tracking it so that because those production hours are how you're going to set your prices, right? That's how you're going to divide your overhead. So that's data, and that's an effective part of leadership, right?
Right.
Or now they call them KPIs, right? These key performance indicators. That's only come around, I think, in the last, what, 5, 10 years?
Yeah.
When I was younger, it was called metrics.
Right.
What are
Exactly.
your metrics? They
I still
changed.
call them metrics.
You still call them metrics, right? So,
Because
I
I'm
mean,
old. I'm old.
right. They changed the terms, but
Huh,
the business principles are the same.
exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
data is how you make your decisions,
Yeah.
and you're not gambling then.
Right.
You are,
Yeah.
you know, uh, making sometimes your best guess or an informed decision. Um, but you're taking a risk.
Yeah.
Every time that you bid a job, you're taking a risk. Did I miss anything? Right. And this is why I also think that an effective part of leadership as you build your team is to have what we used to call in the Army after action reviews after any project. What worked?
Yeah.
What didn't?
Yeah.
You know, and how do we do more of what worked, and how do we eliminate what didn't? And sometimes those conversations, Mark, it's all this stuff that worked. Hopefully, it's already in your culture, and that's why it happened.
Right.
And the things that didn't work, you can't knock them all out at once. You've
No.
you've got to take a methodical approach. What's
You
the
do.
biggest risk?
Well,
Um,
you do know that a good part of management and leadership theory actually comes out of the U.S. Army.
yes.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, yeah. A
They-
lot of what we're talking about
yeah.
originated in the U.S. Army because they know leadership.
Yeah. And well, the services in general.
Right.
I wrote several blogs last year about Colin Powell and the way that he transformed the Army. And here's the thing that's really important. And so the reason I wrote this was because I know that a lot of the people that work with me either don't have employees or they're very small to medium-sized
Right.
businesses with
Right.
maybe a team of 2 to 6. So when in the grand scheme of things, is that person a leader? Yes, but they're not like on a grand scale of, the head of PepsiCo or something like that. However, Colin Powell came out of Vietnam as a field grade officer, which means he was a major, and was assigned to the Pentagon and was talking with other officers about just what a miserable experience the Army had become because of the draft,
Right.
and morale was suffering, and the Army was just terrible at that point. And I know this for a fact because I'd had the XO of my squadron. I spent several miserable days. He was a poor leader. Driving him around the German countryside on a task that he'd been given, and but he told me a story about when he had come in as a lieutenant and how he used to have to carry a loaded sidearm. And this was in 1975, if he went into the barracks because people there would jump him.
Really?
If you weren't armed, they would jump officers and beat the crap out of them. Um, anyway, Colin Powell was a major, yet his influence through realizing what the problem was, talking to other people, and then having the ear of generals and being able to say, this is what I think we should try and do.
Right.
He transformed the Army because by the time I was in the Army, oh, it was a great place to be, right? We were all volunteer.
Right.
There was all sorts of education and schooling. I mean, you were drilled, in from basic training, like what's a lawful order, what's a non-lawful order. But you were taught leadership. You saw good leadership. You saw bad leadership. But in general, I mean, the Army became, and the Navy, right? The other services too made their own changes. Um, but that was all affected by somebody that had very minimal authority in the Army, but had great leadership muscles that he was already starting to flex.
Right.
He was able to take his influence. So how can someone start developing those skills even if they don't have employees?
Well, I think, it always starts with self-awareness.
Mm,
What type of leader are you? And then when you figure that out, then you figure out, okay, so let's take it. I'll take an example. So there are 10 different types of leaders, but I'll look at three that are similar. So you
okay,
have the visionary, the transformational, and the pace setter leader style.
right.
And that's the guy, a good example of that is like Elon Musk is a good example of that. Go out, he's got these great visions. We're going to Mars and we're gonna build electric cars and never been, no one's ever done that before. You know, Now if you're that type of leader, you need to understand what your weakness is. And your weakness is if you're up there creating a vision to get people to believe, that's definitely leadership. But you're not going to be good at the nuts and bolts. How do you
Right.
build that car?
Yep.
How do you build that rocket ship
Yep.
to get to Mars?
Yep.
So what do you want? If you're that type of leadership, you want a more practical, down to earth, perhaps even a employee um, who tends to be more bureaucratic.
Yep. And,
Okay.
and and I can give you an example of that also, because I don't know if this is really true, but it's part of the Disney story, right? Walt Disney apparently was somewhere, and a kid asked him, "Mr. Disney, do you draw Mickey Mouse?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "Well, do you write the stories?" And he's like, "No." And he's like, "Do you do the voice?" And by this point, Walt had stopped doing he used to be Mickey's originally he was the voice, but by this time and he's like, "No." And finally the kid, perturbed, he's like, "Well, what exactly do you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm kind of like the bee that goes from flower to flower taking pollen," right? He was the visionary of the
Right.
company.
Right.
He came up with so many. I mean, he acted out Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs for Bank of America to get them to continue financing on the movie.
Really?
He acted the entire thing out because they only had like pencil and drawings in some
Right.
areas. At first he acted it out for all his animators, right? And then when
Right.
they were halfway through the project and they ran out of money, he acted it out for Bank of America to get the money. He told his vision of Disneyland to Bank of America again and ABC to get them to fund it. But here's the thing, he had three businesses before that business ever took off.
Right. Yeah.
And
That's
the
common.
only reason that business took off is because he finally said to himself, I should probably let my brother take care of the money. And
Right.
he asked his brother Roy, who was more grounded, had business acumen. So Walt was the visionary leader that you're talking about. And Roy was the manager,
Right. Yeah.
you know.
And a
He
lot
was
of
the
times,
bureaucrat.
right, you're talking about, you're focused kind of on small businesses, small
Mhm.
business people who want to go into business for themselves tend to that type of leadership. They tend to be, they have an idea,
Yep.
they have a vision,
Yep.
and and most small businesses fail. Why do they fail? Because that visionary isn't really very good with the numbers.
Yep.
And so that's what you. So if you're a visionary leader, then, hey, then you want a Roy. You want to find yourself a Roy who can
Right.
it can do the numbers part.
Yep.
Because visionary leaders, they're great leaders. They're fun to work with. They are.
Yeah.
Now, to talk to people who work for Steve Jobs, it was fun, it was exciting, but that's not for everyone. A bureaucratic person's going to find that very frustrating working with a Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
So,
Well, right. Imagine how all the engineers must have felt, right? Because they're
mm,
very like methodical, and this is the
mm,
way that things have to be. Um,
yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it's and so as you're discovering your leadership style, folks, you've got to take into account that there are strengths with every single
I know.
type of leadership, but there's also inherent weaknesses, and you need to balance it out. And if you're small, you can't necessarily, hire the person that's best suited to balance it out for you. And, if you're like me, I love my brothers to death, but I wouldn't want to work with any of them. Right. So I'm not,
I'm right there with you.
I'm not gonna ask any of them, to come help me. So, you should understand what your weaknesses are.
Exactly.
You know,
Again, that's why I like Queen Elizabeth.
yeah,
What's your duty? What is your duty here to create this business? Yeah, you have the vision,
right.
but so as the visionary, you have a duty to find someone to take care of the nuts and bolts. And my maternal grandparents were in business um, their entire lives, and my grandfather was the visionary, and my grandmother was the nuts and bolts.
Yep.
Where's the money? Where's it going? Where's it coming from? Where is it going out? My grandmother
Right.
never thought of those things,
Right.
never. And
Yep.
they were a great team. They
And,
they they
but
did all kinds of businesses together like that
but why were they a great team? What allowed them to be a great team?
because my grandmother would take my grandfather's vision and make sure the processes and the money were there to fulfill it. That was
And
her duty. That was her duty. And his
and
duty was to come up with a vision.
but I was shooting for trying to see if you'd think the same thing as me, which was communication, right? They needed to be effectively communicate. His vision needed to be communicated to
Yeah,
her.
yeah,
Her worries about how that's exactly going to work needed to be communicated back to him so that they were able to create that vision
yeah,
together,
yeah. And they
which
did.
is another important aspect of leadership is communication. It's that talking and the listening. Yes?
It's
Yeah.
hard to be a good leader if you don't communicate,
Yeah.
because the biggest part of leadership is communicating. Even, if you're not a visionary, if you're a servant leader or a democratic leader, which is more collaborative, um, then you need to be able to communicate. Because how can you collaborate if you're not communicating?
Yep. I
And
agree.
yeah, so yeah, communication goes without saying. You can't be a leader without communicating. I cannot think of a single example of a good leader who was bad at communication.
No, I can't either. Um, I can think of a lot of bad leaders that let's say communicated on a surface level, but never
Mm,
really got the points across,
yeah,
which is, what made them also a bad leader. I mean, the salient points have to be hit on. Talking for talking's sake is not. I remember reading there was a father and son, both of them were merchant ship captains. So of course the father was a merchant ship captain long before the son was. When the son finally, got his ticket, his merchant's master's certificate, and was going to be given a ship, he'd gone to his father and he asked him, Dad, what advice do you have to give me so that I can be a good master of the ship? And his father said, stay off the intercom. He said the only time that people should hear you is when you're the only person that can be communicating to them exactly what needs to be done. You do not want people tired of your voice,
okay, all right.
you know. And I think that can bear true for
Yeah, yeah,
certain
exactly,
situations,
exactly.
you can talk yourself into more trouble than you can not talk yourself out of.
So it sounds like his father was tended towards the laissez-faire type of manager. That's he's just like, let people do their job.
Well,
And
yeah, but I mean, again, so like the merchant marines are kind of like the military as far as like structure, although they'll argue that, five of them can do more than 200 people on a Navy ship, because they know so much. Um, I think it comes down to trust, right?
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
you're able to trust your engineer that he doesn't need you telling him,
Mm.
whatever it is that needs to be done, or, your helmsman or navigator or whatever. Um, I think trust is very important
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
with your team,
And
and
that's,
it's very easy to lose.
there were two management styles, autocratic and bureaucratic. And that's the essential element there. An autocratic or a bureaucratic leader is not going to have a great deal of trust in their employees. That's why they're autocratic. That's why they're bureaucratic.
Right,
Here it is, a bureaucrat, here are the rules. This is how you do it. End of story. Just do it that way. Because there's
right.
no trust. There's no trust. Now, again, that doesn't mean that that's bad. There are situations where that type of leadership style is appropriate.
Right.
Um, but that's limited. That's limited. I don't think that you'd find that to be the case in most small businesses. It's very hard to be a bureaucrat or an autocrat
Oh
in
yeah.
small
Well,
businesses.
especially because most small businesses, and this is a bad thing, don't have systems. So if you don't
Right.
have systems in place, it's very difficult to be bureaucratic because
Right.
there's no set
Yeah.
of
There's no
rules.
systems. Right. Right.
I think that there need to be systems for a large number of things that you do, just to kind of free you up to be able to, if you're a visionary, to be the visionary,
Right.
but to grow. Um, so influence. Uh, where I had a thought and now it just kind of
All right. What about influence? Hold on. I'm going to turn the light on here.
yep.
I'm sorry. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I remember now what I was going to say. A couple of weeks ago when we were talking on another one of the webinars, I had talked about, um, even though I was a small company at the time and I'd only had like maybe two or three team members working with me, um, I had built influence with my customers, through, of course, doing the three things that I said my business was quality, reliability, and knowledge. But I'd also built influence with them, because they came to know that if they asked me, "Hey, can you do this?" and I couldn't do it, I would refer them to somebody else, or I would say, "Let me find somebody else." And what that started to do was give me a lot more authority with them when I would speak about the things that I did know, because then they knew, well, Dan will only say that he knows something if he knows it,
All right.
right? Would you say that that's a form of leadership or what would you call that?
Well,
Because this
again,
is
you're talking
something I'm
about,
trying to encourage, some of my listeners, my viewers, to instill in themselves in a way that's comfortable to them.
well, it goes back to the trust being an aspect of leadership. Um, People aren't going to follow you if they don't trust you.
Right.
Um, and most leadership styles, and a bureaucratic style, it doesn't matter. This is what you do the job. Everyone goes home at the end of the day. Autocrats tend to also not instill trust. Their mechanism of I don't want to say control, but their mechanism of getting things done is authoritarian.
Right.
It's not a like, I trust you to do this, you will do this, and the
Right.
story, or get fired. Um,
Right.
and again, there are no, that's not my style of management. I would not like to work with someone who had
Mhm.
that style of management, but there are people who do. There are
Right,
people who like to be told,
right.
do it this way, and you'll get fired if you don't. Some people respond to that. I wouldn't, but some people do.
No, yeah. Well, and again, as you'd started off this conversation, uh, you had talked about when you were telling your students they need to look at the person that they're
Yeah,
interviewing with if
yeah,
they're applying for a job.
right,
What's their leadership like? Because some people may very well gravitate to somebody like the guy that was working for you that you said would always come to you. Well,
right,
what do you want to do? Right?
right,
That's probably the type of person that responds very well to an autocratic
right,
type
right.
relationship.
Just tell me what to do. Just tell me
Yes.
exactly. Just tell me
Yeah.
what to do, and I'll
Yeah.
do it. And I'll do
Yeah.
it. And
So,
give me the parameters. So if I break it, I know what trouble I'm in.
yeah.
That's what that fits there.
So that trust, right? It bonds you with the people that are working with you, but it can bond you, like you said, with your clients or maybe even your
Right,
vendors or
right.
the community at large, if you're building up trust. And then that gives you influence to be able to move into other areas maybe that interest you as your business grows.
Yeah, well, we're getting a little outside of the box here because of what we've been talking about as leadership styles and managing
Mhm.
people,
Right.
and particularly employees. Um, Leadership in the community at large, I think, again, that's where trust plays a much larger role. And what you were talking about, your customers trusted you because you're straight with them. You
Right.
did your duty rather than your self-interest. Your self-interest would have been to say, "Yeah, I can do this." Where your duty was to say, "I really can't do this. Let me find someone else who can do it for you."
Right.
So trust is important and the community at large and with customers.
Yeah.
Um, but that's yet a whole different topic. We could do it. That's a
Well, yeah.
marketing. That's marketing.
Well, yeah,
It's
it's
sales.
it is marketing, and but it, the I think that the point that I want to get at here for people is it doesn't matter, you're listening to this, maybe you have team members now, maybe you don't ever want team members, but what type of leader can you be?
Yeah,
What type of influence can you exert, within your company, within your life? I think that, sticking true to your core principles,
yeah.
and who you are. I had sat on, I think you knew this. I used to be on an advisory board for one of the districts down in the city that I lived at. And so I worked with the city councilman in that district.
Mhm.
And he had asked me one day, me and a couple of other people, if we would go to the police academy's graduation and speak with the cadets that were getting ready to graduate. And so this was COVID, during COVID. So we actually didn't go there, but we did it by Zoom. And so they put us in breakout rooms. And I I spoke with them about, what my expectation was of them as they become, police officers. I said, I'm telling you as one citizen of your city what I would expect, and this is it. Um, I was told this by my friend who retired off the Orange County Sheriff's Office that he would teach his recruits when he was training them. Remember, when you arrest somebody, you are the starring figure in the chapter of their life for my worst day ever. And he
Yeah.
said, so to you, it's just a job. You put the silver bracelets on them, you do the paperwork, you drop them off at the jail, and then you're back on your shift. But to them, it's a life-altering experience. So treat them with compassion. I said, and this is what I would encourage all of you that are taking this job, just to remember it's a job that you are performing. It's a noble job, but you should treat these people because some people, they just make a stupid mistake. I'm not, talking like, a guy that, maybe guns down a bunch of school children, but most arrests are not, of the violent, horrific type. And so anyway, the feedback came from that afterwards, and almost every single student that I told that story to said that that was the number one moment in their meetings was my story because it resonated with them. And I've actually had a couple of those cadets that are still on the police force. I'd bump into them and stuff. Oh, Mr. Jones, I remember when you had told me, da 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 da. So what's the point of my story? I didn't have any leadership authority. I was not, the district. I wasn't sitting in that chair, right? I wasn't the district councilman. I was just somebody that was sent there to tell them as a citizen. Yet my values, the things that matter to me, I was able to convey to them in a way that stuck with them and maybe, made one or two police officers a little bit more compassionate in their day. Because my brother's just retired off the job. It's a very hard life.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard.
It can wear on you. You can become jaded. My brother didn't, but there are people that can become very jaded. So my hope was that, maybe I could encourage them not to be. Right. So
Right.
I don't know. Maybe that's outside the box, but you don't take your leadership off when you leave the company at the end of the
No,
day,
you
do you?
don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. Not leadership is a way of life, I guess. And it's you you
Okay.
have a
So
responsibility.
yeah, well, it does come with responsibility.
Yeah.
And if you want to grow your company, it's a responsibility that you will have to wear, even when it's not business hours.
Yeah.
Even though you can't expect your people to care, you've got to care.
Yeah.
It, what's one thing that you think people could start doing today if they want to be a better leader, or if they just want to be a leader in general?
Um, I think the start is where you start in most instances in life, self-awareness. What style of leadership are you most comfortable with? And then from that, that determines who you're going to hire and the type of employee you're looking for.
Right.
Um, if I ran my own company, I would not look for employees who liked a bureaucratic environment because they're not going to get that. So, who are you? What are your values? How are you? And I think the way to look at it is, what type of boss would you like? Because that's the
Right.
type of boss you are then. And so that's a place to start. What type think in your mind, what is how would I define my ideal boss? What would I want to see in that person? And
Okay.
there's your ideal, there's your goal.
Right.
And then once you start hiring people, because that's what we're talking about here is being a leader for employees. Once you start hiring people, start looking for you're not looking for clones, but you're looking for people who would be comfortable with your culture, your corporate culture,
Right.
which is comes from your leadership style. So
And your values.
and your values.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. We're going to wrap up here in a moment, but I just want to see if anybody has any questions, either on the YouTube or here within the group. So if there's, just bear with me, Mark, while I
Sure.
try and see if there's anything that comes out here. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. Mark, I want to thank you for your time. It's
My
always a
pleasure.
pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. And then to everybody else, have a great week. I do want to remind you that come Friday, within the Landscaping and Business Growth Hub, we do have the 6 p.m. Team huddle for anybody that has any issues that they want to bring up. And that's it. Okay. Look forward to
Okay.
seeing you all.